I'm a Blender artist, and let me tell you a story of many ups and downs, where I turned this simple template into a Cookie Monster's dream in 10 days time. Coming up with a good idea is hands down the hardest part of these contests. This time I also had a big problem. I only had 10 days to complete this project before my winter holiday started, so I had to be really fast. First I thought about making a Dune-related project in celebration for the new movie, but I would have ended up using assets from old projects, and it just didn't feel right. I had to figure out something new, so I could also learn new things and grow during this process. The reference model got me thinking about crash test dummies, where they would drive a car straight to a wall, with particles flying in the air and maybe even explosions. But as I showed the test animation to my child, there was an instant reply.
Can you put candy there?
Well, yeah, sure I can. So I started the whole process from scratch with the candy as the main theme. But as I thought about the idea more, it got me thinking about the character, who he would be. Not Wonky Willy or whatever that guy is. Only logical idea that came to my mind was that the character had to be the Cookie Monster, and the scene would be a dream of his, full of big-ass cookies and candy.
Yeah, boy.
Now that I had a solid idea figured out, it was time to start producing. I like to start most projects by doing a rough sketch using the Grease Pencil tool. It is a drawing tool built inside of Blender that allows you to sketch and animate very fluently. I enabled Canvas and moved the object in 3D space roughly where the foreground should end. Then I added the thickness and opacity modifiers so I could control the line thickness and opacity freely. I left the stroke placement to origin, which is where I moved the object, and set the drawing plane to view so I could draw from the camera and see the scene unfold. I had to enable Z-Pass to render these test animations out so they would display correctly. Then I created the actual landscape with subdivided planes. I sculpted the plane a little and added a displace modifier with the cloud texture so I could tweak the shape fast. I kept thinking about this fudge where everything would stick out, so I added a very basic shader with the orange color, little bit of metallic, and a noise texture for the bump to make the surface more uneven. Then I added a HDRI I got from Polyhaven. Add-on I'm using for these is Easy HDRI that sets up these nodes automatically for easier tweaking. Links to these are in the description. So a scene full of big ass cookies and candy will do. Candy is a basic sphere, scaled down to look like a M&M's candy. This is what I do when I want each object to have different color when using particle systems or geometry nodes. I go to the shader editor and add an object info node, going through a color ramp that has a spectrum of colors in it, to basic BSDF shader. Cookies are baked, scaled down spheres that are slightly sculpted, and added a texture for a real cookie for flavor. Also sprinkled with some bump. I added some bigger objects to the scene to give it some variations and points to focus. This is a dream scene, so it doesn't matter if there's random stuff in there. Big Cookie's chocolate stripe is a Bezier curve that is drawn to the surface of the cookie. For the stairs, I used a mesh provided with the template, but I added a geometry node setup that fills the mesh with cookies. I just need to distribute points on the faces node, set to a Poisson disk with modified settings, then an instance on points node, where we can add geometry to each point, and an object to instance to the points. It can also be a collection of objects. This time it was a single squashed sphere, like the candy. It also used the same method to variate color between instances, and a little bit of bump. I also added a translate instance node, because I needed to tweak the position a little. I made the railings from the same stairs mesh. I chose the top faces and deleted everything else, so I was left with these edges. I duplicated the object and deleted each side of points, so I was left with an array of points on each side. Then I pressed the F short key to join the points and deleted the face and edge and extruded downwards. Then I added the skin modifier, so I could tweak the width by selecting edges and pressing Ctrl A shortcut. Adding a subdivide modifier helped with the blockiness. The texture is a simple BSDF with a noise texture for the bump. Cookie Monster's model is super simple topology. I exported the model as a FBX and uploaded it to Mixamo.com, where I could auto-rig the model. Then I imported the model back to Blender and added the subdivision modifier and smooth modifiers. First, I tried to copy the reference animation by using Rococo's free add-on that allows you to retarget rigged animations. But it didn't work at all this time, since my model was a little bit shorter and different build than the reference one. To solve this problem, I ended up manually fixing the animation to match the reference one. I focused that the legs would meet at the right places first. Then I added other motions like bounciness when climbing the stairs. I added a cookie and parented it to the finger bone. After that, I animated the cookie monster walk a few steps and stuffed the cookie in his mouth. I did major poses first and tweaked the rest after. Then I added a shape key for the mouth, so I could animate the cookie eating part. I also added keyframes to the cookie's render setting, so it disappears when eaten. Flying crumbles are made of using a simple plane that has a particle systems in it. It shoots particles from the mouth that last for a few frames and disappears when the mouth does its thing. It was parented to the head bone. Main mesh and railing had a collision set so the particles would collide correctly. For the Cookie Monster's hair, I really wanted to have a dynamic simulations to it. Big problem was that it kept bugging for some reason during my testing. I couldn't find a solution how to fix it, and using geometry nodes hair curves was super slow for some reason, so I ended up using the basic hair particle system with no animation and around 35,000 particles. I made a new vertex group and weight painted the front part of the mesh, so particles don't show up in that area, saving me a little bit of computing time. I used a principled hair shader that works really well when used with cycles. Finally, it was time for some finishing touches. I looked into my scene and felt something was off, so I used weight painting in parts I didn't want candy or cookies spawned. A lot of tweaking of the seed values so that many cookies wouldn't overlap. I also added a quick fork between foreground and background. It is a simple scaled up plane that has a basic white principled BSDF shader and lowered the alpha value. For the render settings, I used cycles with 400 samples and lowered the noise threshold. Light paths were mostly set to 5. Light clamping was 9 for direct and 10 for indirect. I felt this gave an okay result without having super long render times. Default denoising did a okay job even with the hair particles. For color management, I used Filmic because it displayed the colors really nicely instead of the new default AGX. I used high contrast for the whole scene. This project has around 85,000 particles, and even with all the optimizing, it still took me many hours to render all this out. Blender crashed about 5 times during the process. I rendered everything to PNG since I didn't have time for post-processing. I used Blender's video editing to stitch everything together and submitted the artwork. I managed to get everything done just before my holiday, so I could relax and have some time off working. And behold, the final result. Even if I didn't make it to the top 100, I still got to make a project I'm proud of. I hope you also learned something new. See you next time.